Hello everyone. So today I will be discussing my newsletter about information processing. Information processing is basically the way our mind works to retain information. It has to do with storing and not only storing information or retaining it, but also knowing when to utilize it and under what circumstances to utilize it. That's what makes information processing so important, that it's not just a process of retaining the information, but it's a process and it's a systemic kind of um, automatic light switch that turns on in our brain to give us to just give us insight on when to use that information, and also to know what information to retain for just a small amount of time and what information to retain for long-term periods of time. Like, we know that if something is important to us, then we're obviously going to retain it, keep it in heart, make sure we don't forget it. Like when we meet our significant other, we obviously want to remember their name. We want to remember details about them because they stood out to us and they feel important to us at that moment. But if it's knowing what locker you had. For example, when I want to take the CBEST, I had to know what there was a certain locker I had. To this day, I cannot remember the number of that locker because it was just irrelevant. It was for that moment. So it's knowing when to use that information. But obviously, after my exam, I had to go and I had to remember what locker I was in because that was important information for that moment. But up to this day, it was not relevant anymore, so I disregarded it. But information processing, to start off, we see a couple of pictures here that I'll explain after. Information processing basically has to do with the way, like I mentioned earlier, the human mind works to take in information, to store it, but like I also said, to recall information for usage. It performs operations off of information stored, and it retrieves it when needed for a certain situation or a certain circumstance, like the number of my locker for that specific day, for that specific hour. But also, to get more technical, it is kind of the input of information that's received, but it flows into sensory registers that have to do with the five senses. Then the information can either be stored as short-term memory or long-term memory. Some definitions or some pictures we see here are the note-taking. We see that the note-taking will probably fall under working memory. And it's probably best to touch on these pictures after, but some definitions are self-regulatory knowledge, which is called conditional knowledge. It's a way to manage your learning and knowing when is the best time to use either the declarative or procedural knowledge. We have sensory memory, and this is a system that holds or retains information only briefly or for a minimal occasion. Going back to like the CBEST example. Attention, it's what's the stimuli. One thing that I use is like the AC turning on. You hear it so constantly that when you turn on, it becomes a stimuli and you already know that's the AC turning on. So it kind of guides us instantly to what we already know. Automaticity, which is being able to perform a task almost automatic, that you don't even think about it. For example, when I turn on my car, I don't really think, is it on D? I just am so used to cranking it up to that certain level that I don't even need to look or think anymore. I just know it's automatic. I'm very used to it. Working memory, this has to do with cognitive tasks, for example, taking a test, knowing when to utilize the information that the professor gave on an assignment. And also cognitive load. I think I'm missing one here. Cognitive load, which is the wide variety of sources needed to complete that task. And I'm missing long-term memory. And long-term memory just has to do with restoring something, kind of having something in your permanent memory. You know your name. That's permanent. You can't lose sight of that. So going back to some examples, like a car alarm going off. A car alarm going off will basically have to do with the sensory memory. You automatically know that it's something minimal or it's something occurring at that occasion. You hear your alarm going off because a cat walked close to it. You know that sensory memory. I know that it's automatically my alarm. And then we have knowing your address, which would fall under long-term memory. That's permanent. You have to know where you live. When you go to the mail, when you go to, your employer, you have to fill out information. You have to know what your address is. Solving a math problem will fall under working memory, and that's where the brain enables enough information to help you utilize it with that cognitive task that you're dealing with, like taking an exam. And next, remembering a song. Remembering a song can also fall under, let's see, it could fall under quite a few, but I would say that remembering a song is probably, if we use remembering a song for the ABCs, it would definitely be under self-regulatory knowledge, where we use that song and we know to sing that song when we forget what comes after G. Note-taking. Note-taking is a perfect example of working memory. The games and knowing when to utilize that information, which I think would also fall under self-regulatory knowledge. You know when to use that money, when to make that step, and it's kind of for your own best time use. You know how to manage your learning on that area of the game. And like I said, music can fall under quite a few. I think also when you just hear the beat of the music, you know that's the stimuli, and the attention goes to quickly what song that might be. So this is my newsletter, just talking about information processing, what it has to do with, and important aspects about the theory.